So I turned 42 this year. You would think I would have done a video like this on my 40th, but I guess it just slipped my mind. I just recently decided to jump back on the YouTube bandwagon, not because I'm trying to carve out a niche for myself, or because I'm trying to make a living at it, but seeing as how my background is in film and media, I just wanted to make sure that I kept doing it in some form, just so it's something I can say I'm actively pursuing on some level. If you follow my channel, you might notice that I post content pretty infrequently, and that's just because I can only post something if I have something meaningful to say. I watch a lot of YouTube while I'm at work, passively in my vehicle, and chances are if there's something I'm interested in, like a top 10 video or a ranking video, or just listening to a couple of dorks discuss bad movies, well, the internet is chock full of that stuff. It's hard to discuss emulation or gaming handhelds or retro games in general because there are so many great content creators who already do things like that. When I first created this channel, I'm sure you noticed that there was a decent blend of movie and retro gaming content, and that's because I didn't feel it was necessary to divide up the channel. Lots of channels excel at doing both. And while I do enjoy movies, mostly older movies, for some reason the videos that I tend to get seen are the gaming ones. That's interesting to me because in the last decade or so, my interest has shifted quite a bit from movies to video games. Anyway, I could ramble on and on about this, but this video is all about video games. I went through every year that I've been born and picked the best video game that I played from each year, starting with 1983. Full disclosure, I didn't pick anything from 2025 because it's still early and I just haven't found anything worth talking about. I'm aware there's a lot of cool stuff coming out later this year, like for the Switch 2, but I didn't want to just pick a random game from a hat, look up what people are saying about it, just so I can talk about it. No, this list consists of games that I've mostly played a lot of and that I have some connection to in some way. And I am aware that TechDweeb did a very similar video to this one a couple years back. That's where I got the idea. But I figured, hey, now's as good a time as any to pick my favorite games from each decade that I was born and talk about them. To you. Sound good? So without further dilly-dallying, as TechDweeb's mom used to say, let's get started. Now, the earliest game I remember playing is this game called Carnival, which was released by Sega, if you can believe that. The game is played on a single screen, and I think you're supposed to be in a shooting gallery. Let's go with that. The object of the game is simple. You have to shoot any object that scrolls horizontally across the screen. It's simple enough. I really wanted to put this game on the list, but it turns out that this one came out in 1980, so I can't. I'm not old enough. But I thought it deserved an honorable mention because I do have vague memories of playing this one on either an old Apple II or Commodore 64. I don't know which one I had. Computers in the 80s were, well, there were a lot of them. So let's start with 1983. My pick for that year is Dragon's Lair. I know people have mixed opinions about this one because it's a game that dazzles with its luscious animation quality, but has very little gameplay. It's basically a game of Simon Says. You, as Dirk the Daring, navigate a mysterious castle so you can rescue the pornographically hot Princess Daphne from the dragon's singe. Most of you know that Don Bluth himself did the animation on this one. It was impressive for the time because in the arcade, the game actually ran on a Laserdisc. Do any of you even know what a Laserdisc is? It's a big honkin' disc about the size of a record that stores video information. A movie takes like 10 hours to watch all the way through because you need to flip the disc multiple times. Thank God I started collecting Laserdiscs a few years ago. Anyway, I never actually played the original in the arcade, but had I seen it back then, it would have blown my mind. Like I said, it plays like Simon Says, where you need to press the right button at the right time to see if you make it to the next room in the castle or die a miserable death. I love the death animations here. Dirk doesn't look scared when he dies, he looks annoyed, like he knows the player controlling him sucks and they need to get better. The game has actually been ported to lots of things, including a port for Android. There was even an actual DVD years ago that actually allows you to play the game on just a normal DVD player. My favorite version of the game is probably on the Wii, released in a compilation called Dragon's Lair Trilogy. The disc includes Dragon's Lair 2, and an unrelated adventure, Space Ace. The video is very crisp, and it has on-screen controls that makes it an easier experience. This is a title that I used to play a lot on my phone just to kill time, and it's just as charming today as it was back then, as far as I know. For 1984, I have Duck Hunt. Like most of us NES users, we had the Super Mario Duck Hunt combo cart, and Duck Hunt probably wasn't played nearly as much as that other game. And to be fair, given that Duck Hunt is even on this list, it just goes to show what else was happening in gaming that year. I mean, this was 1 year after the infamous video game Crash, but it is a game that I played a lot as a kid. Using a light gun to play a game was a novel thing back then. I don't emulate it often, but with these kinds of games, I actually don't mind using my mouse. I know, you're probably thinking, playing a gun game with a mouse? You savage. You probably light your house with gas lanterns too, you freak. And to that I say, so what if I do? If I want to use gas lanterns to light up my house to save money on my electric bill, that's my business. Anyway, moving on. Yeah, you saw this coming. 1985 brought us Super Mario Bros. This was the game that was responsible for making me fall in love with video games. I had never seen anything like it before, and I have to tell you, even today, the game is still impressive when you remember just how primitive gaming was back then. Having these large scrolling levels was impressive when you consider that most games from this era consisted of one screen. And not only were the levels massive, but there were 32 of them. Holy crap, that's a lot of levels for a game designed in 1985. There's so much to love about this game, from its colorful graphics, its iconic sound effects and music, and its fun power-ups. And most importantly, it's got great controls. Mario has momentum. To this day, it's a fun one to just pick up and play. I love the updated version that's on Super Mario All-Stars, but it's fun to once in a while just play the original 8-bit version for posterity's sakes. This one's tough to beat, and every platformer, either 2D or 3D, owes itself to this game. It's damn near a masterpiece. 1986 gave us Castlevania. Most of you know what Castlevania is, and the series has come a long way since then. I played this game all the time as a kid. I originally got my NES secondhand from a guy who was selling his NES so he could buy a Sega Genesis. I don't know what happened to him, but he probably sells used socks in an alley today. That's the only future anyone who owned a Sega Genesis likely could have. I'm just kidding. I love the Genesis. When I got my NES in the late 80s, two of the games I owned for it were Castlevania and its sequel, Castlevania 2. I liked the original more though. It was just much more straightforward. It offered killer music and a really haunting atmosphere. All that gothic scenery was amazing in its 8-bit glory. Fun fact, I didn't actually beat the game until a few years ago, on an emulator of all things. Funny enough, I rarely use save states. It's just a personal preference, but I prefer to save my game as the game intends me to. Unless the game doesn't have any kind of save feature, then I might indulge. But when I beat Castlevania, I saved right before the final battle with Dracula. And I kid you not, it took me 3 days to finally beat the bastard. Yeah, Dracula gave me problems. It's still a fun game though, even if you can't make it past the second level. It's very challenging. 1987 is tricky. I almost picked Contra, and had the NES version came out that year, it definitely would have been on this list. But in 1987, it was the arcade version that came out, and I'm sorry, but if you're going to play any version of Contra, it's gotta be the NES version. So I begrudgingly chose Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, which did come out in 1987. Now, hear me out. You're probably wondering why I chose Zelda 2 and not the original game. I liked the first game just fine, but as a kid, I just didn't play it that much. When I got my NES, I had Zelda 2. The guy who sold it to me hated the first game. He was much more in tune with the RPG elements, the grind if you will, that permeated throughout Zelda 2. I was never the biggest fan of this game, but I did play it a lot because it seemed like you were on an epic adventure, and the big difficulty spikes that happened early on were just a part of the experience. It's a very unique game because while I respect a lot of old RPGs, I don't really like playing them. I'm not a fan of turn-based RPGs. So with Zelda 2, Miyamoto decided to basically make an action game that still gave you the satisfaction of leveling up your character. To be honest, despite some of the problems I have with this game, I wish more RPGs were like it today. Today it seems like developers have pushed more for action RPGs like the Final Fantasy VII remakes, which I friggin' love. I actually started playing this recently on my Retroid Pocket 5, and I wasn't very good at it. In fact, I lost all my lives in the first castle. Yeah, it's been a while since I've played, but Zelda 2 is a truly unique experience, and I don't know. If all you've ever heard about this one is that it's not great, you might be surprised. I mean, there's a reason the cartridge was gold. For 1988, this shouldn't surprise anybody, but I chose Super Mario Bros. 3. Although, I distinctly remember this game coming out in 1990, so 1988 must have been the year it was released in Japan. Whatever. What I like about the original Super Mario trilogy, the 3 games we got in North America anyway, was that each game played very differently from the last. Had we gotten the version of Super Mario 2 that Japan got, I think Mario 3 would have been a nice breath of fresh air. But even then, considering how much I like Mario 2, Mario 3 takes what made the original game so fun and improved on everything. This was a game you played a lot over summer vacation. I would stay inside all day long or on weekends just to play it to completion. It still didn't have a save feature, which was weird considering how big the game was. In 1992, my house caught on fire. True story. I lost everything. It sounds like a tragedy, but no one was hurt, and at the end of the day, the insurance company was able to replace all of my NES games. My family stayed at a hotel all summer while our house was being repaired, and one day my dad brought home a brand new NES to play, and it came packaged with Super Mario 3. That was a great summer. For 1989, there's little competition. I gotta go with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the arcade game. This is one of those games I had to play whenever I saw it, and it was pretty common. Back then, arcade machines weren't just found inside of skeevy, dimly lit rooms. There was a chance you could run into one at a 7-Eleven or your local family diner. Heck, even Chuck E. Cheese at one point had normal, run-of-the-mill arcade machines. Every kid had the watered-down NES port, which is a decent NES game for sure, but you can't beat meeting 3 other strangers and slamming down a few quarters. 1990 marked the release of Super Mario World in Japan. While North America wouldn't see the release of the SNES until 1991, it was clear that this new Mario game would usher in a whole new era of bright, colorful 16-bit graphics. While it didn't leave as much of an impact as the original Super Mario Bros., it came pretty darn close. The graphics and animations were unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It was clear that game developers were getting closer to bringing the arcade experience to homes, and Super Mario World still holds up to this day. That's not something you can say about every game from this era. But Super Mario World is a pristine platformer, setting a new standard for what these types of games should look and feel like. It introduced Yoshi, who was a gimmicky yet really fun new mechanic, and the new cape power-up, while it took a little while to get used to, was a welcome new feature. The worlds were charming and inventive, and the amount of secrets was mind-blowing. Talk about a game with major replayability. This is one of the rare games where I can't find a single thing wrong with it. It's just simple, pure joy. I didn't get the SNES when it first came out. My uncle wanted to dip his toe into video games, and the big game that really got him hooked was 1991's The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. I would go over his house in the summertime to play it. I was never very good at any of the Zelda games as a kid, despite growing up with Zelda 2. Every time I would go over my uncle's house, I was fascinated with how much further he progressed. He would either be carrying a new sword, or be wearing a different outfit, or have way more heart containers than the last time I was over. And even though I had a difficult time navigating the dungeons, even back then, I was impressed with the game's epic quality. The sound effects, the music, the graphics, awe-inspiring. Over the years, I've become an expert at this game. It's one I usually pop in around the holidays, playing on my laptop or handheld as I'm prepping the turkey or whatever. I beat this game at least once a year, and it never gets old. It's the perfect Zelda game, and that's saying something. Few games left as much of an impact on me than Mortal Kombat from 1992. While the version I played the most as a kid was the Sega Genesis port, which was released the following year, the version I play to this day is the arcade original. I have to admit there isn't much to the gameplay. This one's all about the blood, the fatalities, and the satisfaction of violently dismembering your opponent before moving on to the next challenger. Even though the fighting system isn't as deep as what you'd find in something like Street Fighter II, there was a sense of realism with Mortal Kombat that was novel for the time. This game was also heavily marketed to dumb kids like me, which made it one of the most popular talking points on the school playground. It's still fun to play to this day. It might not be as out of control as the more recent offerings, but I appreciate its early 90s simplicity. Speaking of Mortal Kombat, the following year, in 1993, we got Mortal Kombat 2. This is my favorite fighting game of all time. It added a ton of new characters to the roster, and not only did each character have 2 fatalities, but they also added friendships, fatalities, and stage fatalities to the mix. You could even pick Shang Tsung as a playable character and use him to morph into other fighters. This is the one I keep coming back to, and it's the only arcade 1-up machine I've ever bought. Around this time, I got a Super Nintendo, and the hot game of 1994 was Donkey Kong Country. I couldn't believe how good this game looked at the time. Even today, it still looks impressive. And while it doesn't really add anything to the platforming genre, this game is all about its presentation. It just feels good jumping on enemies and running through the levels. The music is some of the most memorable the console has to offer, and it's just dripping with a charm that no game has ever matched. This one was truly impressive, and it's still fun today. 1995 gave us Super Mario World 2: Yoshi's Island. This is one of the few games I would rent but never owned. I feel that Yoshi's Island is criminally underrated, probably because it looks and feels so much different from your typical Mario game. It has this pleasing coloring book aesthetic that probably felt a little childish to most gamers at the time. But beneath its cute exterior is a really fun game. Being able to transform into different vehicles is just a fun mechanic in its own right, and the bosses are both fun and inventive, which isn't something I can really say about the more typical boss battles in prior Mario games. Yeah, I get it. The sound of crying baby Mario can be excruciating at times, but to me, it just adds to the charm. And that final boss battle? Epic. This is a game that I do come back to once in a while, and it's hard to find a game this unique that manages to be both charming and fun. 1996 was all about the release of the Nintendo 64, which Nintendo had been hyping up for years, it felt like. When it finally came out in September of that year, everybody was praising Super Mario 64. Yeah, it looks a bit dated by today's standards, but you have to put yourselves in 1996. Very few games offered the kind of freedom this game did. In terms of game design, it's kind of clever how the developers chose to give us 15 large worlds to explore, as opposed to 90 linear levels, where the goal was to get to the end of the stage before the timer ran out. I had never experienced a game with so much freedom to explore and play around in. The term sandbox game wasn't thrown around back then, but this might just be the first game to earn that term. The camera system was, and still is, a pain in the ass, especially during those later levels, which call for precision platforming, but all in all, Super Mario 64 is still an incredibly fun game. I've told this story before, but when I played the original Dragon Warrior on my trusty NES, the experience scared me away from RPGs. I had heard about the Final Fantasy series for years, mostly through Nintendo Power, but I was just not ready to invest hours of my time into a game I didn't think I'd enjoy. But then it arrived, 1997's Final Fantasy VII. For many people, it was the reason to own a Sony PlayStation. Even if RPGs weren't your thing, the game's visual aesthetic was enough to blow most people away with its then cutting-edge cinematic cutscenes, insane visuals, and completely engaging story. I had never played a game where I was so invested in the characters, probably more so than the actual gameplay. It was the first game that took me over a year to complete, and while I've never considered myself good at it, I totally screwed myself the first time I fought Sephiroth, it's definitely the game that turned me on to other RPGs. And suffice to say, this is my favorite game in the series. Around this time, as I was getting ready to enter high school, I began to have less and less time to play video games. The one game I remember from 1998 was Parasite Eve on the PlayStation. I only played the game once, but it combined two really unique styles of gameplay. The turn-based combat that was prevalent in most RPGs at the time, mixed with the intense, heart-pounding survival horror gameplay of the Resident Evil series. The game has some truly haunting visuals and some disturbing themes, but I remember this as being a truly unique experience, and one that, surprisingly, I don't hear a lot of people talking about. I never played its sequel, but the original is a must-play if you're an RPG or survival horror fan. This might not be a popular opinion, but I enjoy Final Fantasy VIII, which is my pick for 1999. The hype for this one was largely due to the success of Final Fantasy VII. The thing was, since a lot of people got their feet wet with 7, I think a lot of fans were anticipating the return of Cloud, Tifa, and the rest of the gang. What we got was something that barely resembled anything FF7 had to offer. The graphics got a complete overhaul with character models that looked far more realistic than the chunky LEGO characters we got in the prior game. The world was a little more contemporary, if not vaguely futuristic, and the whole story was centered around a blossoming romance between its two star-crossed leads, Squall Leonhart and Rinoa Hartley. Seriously, why do each of their last names have the word heart in them? I've always had a fondness for this game, but until recently, I never really knew how to properly play it. I sucked at the triple triad card game, I didn't know how the junctioning system worked, and if you know this game, you know that leveling up your character will severely hinder your experience, as all the enemies scale with you. This was a frustrating experience because much like my playthrough of FF7, I was unprepared for the fight against Ultimecia. For decades, I was unable to finish the game until I used an online walkthrough and finally beat that old bitch's ass once and for all. I still consider this a good game, with an epic story and some of the best visuals the PlayStation has to offer, but it is somewhat flawed and overly complicated. Tekken was one of the flagship 3D fighting games for the PlayStation, competing with Sega's Virtua Fighter series. Although most genres were transitioning to 3D, fighting games had a rough road because moving your fighters across a three-dimensional plane completely changed the way we perceived fighting games to work. But somehow, Tekken did a pretty decent job of it. Yes, the original Tekken is a little rough, but it paved the way for how 3D fighting games should feel. In 2000, we got the best looking and best playing Tekken to date with Tekken Tag Tournament on the brand new PlayStation 2. I didn't play it a ton when it first came out, although it was a cool novelty. For a launch game, it really showcased what Sony's new console could do. To this day, it looks amazing. This is one of the few PS2 games I emulate frequently, and for good reason. It's just so damn fun. Tekken is one of those series that's easy to pick up even if you've never played a fighting game before, and it's one of the reasons I decided to pick up a Retroid Pocket. It's a lot of fun all these years later, and I highly recommend you check it out if it's been a while since you've gone toe-to-toe with Panda. While I did own a Nintendo GameCube, it was really my younger brothers who got a lot out of it. By then, the GameCube just felt too kiddie-ish for me, which I know was a common criticism at the time. I loved playing Rogue Squadron 2 Rogue Leader, which still looks good, even by today's standards, but most of the games that I played on the GameCube just weren't as good as their prior iterations. Wave Race Blue Storm has nothing on Wave Race 64, and I'm sorry, but I've tried Super Mario Sunshine several times, and that game sucks. But the one game I didn't give a chance was 2001's Luigi's Mansion. Yeah, a game starring Mario's taller, less heroic brother. I didn't play this one until a couple decades later, but it turned out to be a really memorable experience. It offers just the right amount of creepiness, fun and spooky without being too intense for the kiddies. The graphics are superb, and discovering all the unique ways to kill ghosts is always a fun time. It's as much of a puzzle game as it is a survival horror platformer, and is a defining title on the console. In my opinion, way better than the official Mario game for that platform. 2002 saw the release of the original Kingdom Hearts. By the time it came out, I was kind of done with RPG, so I missed out on the whole Squaresoft Disney craze. It wasn't until Kingdom Hearts 3 came out that I decided to give the series a try, so I bought Kingdom Hearts The Story So Far for the PS4. And it was a pretty fun game. I mean, technically it was a little janky, and I felt that the worlds were too small. I didn't feel like I had the same amount of freedom that I enjoyed in something like Super Mario 64. But the story was lighthearted and novel enough, and the gameplay was fun and addicting, and seeing recognizable Final Fantasy characters sprinkled throughout didn't hurt. I have to admit I never actually finished the game, although I did get close enough to the end where I feel like I experienced enough of it. There wasn't a lot going on in 2002, so if I had to pick, I guess I could do worse. I've always enjoyed racing games, specifically arcade racers like Cruisin' USA and Ridge Racer. But in 2003, one game that blew my socks off was Need for Speed Underground for PS2. Like the title suggests, the game places a heavy emphasis on underground street racing, where you spend a majority of the game racing for money and customizing your ride. Looking back, there really aren't a ton of customization options, but the real fun comes in the variety, like racing in circuits, drag racing, and drifting. It's also one of the fastest racing games, giving you a pretty good adrenaline rush. If you feel the need for speed, there are few that come close to Underground. In 2004, I was a carpet installer, more precisely an apprentice. I didn't work there long, but one of my bosses was super into building computers. He didn't seem to know a ton about games, and when I would bring up classics like Mario, he didn't have very nice things to say. But there is one game that year that he was building his rig specifically for, and that game was Doom 3. He really sold it to me. Now, I love the original Doom. I'm sad I didn't put it on my list, but hey, one game per year is a tricky thing to pull off. While Doom 3 seems to be the black sheep today, you have to realize how important this game was back when it first came out. Simply put, no game looked this realistic. The lighting, the shadows, the textures on the character models, this was state of the art. Doom 3's biggest innovation, however, was that it was straying from the fast-paced run-and-gun nature of the original games in favor of a creepier haunted house feel. With its flashlight mechanic, id Software was going for a survival horror game. It was still fun, but I can see why so many people might dismiss it nowadays. However, the game required some serious hardware to run decently. It's amazing to think that when today, even an Android phone will run it mostly fine. The version of the game I'm most familiar with is the BFG edition, which minimizes the flashlight mechanic, so it does feel a little more action-centric. I still really enjoy playing this, even though it's a hard one to go back to after the chaos that is Doom Eternal. I've always appreciated the Resident Evil series. In my youth, I was a pretty big horror fan, and Resident Evil was the closest thing to experiencing a horror movie in real time. But I must admit, I suck at survival horror games. Keeping track of such a limited inventory, not to mention that the game could be extremely stingy with its save points, it's a game that I continue to struggle with. It's a good game, but it doesn't play to my strengths as a gamer. I played all the Resident Evil games up to Code Veronica on the Dreamcast, which is one of the best looking games of its time, but the difficulty seemed to ramp up with each new installment. So when Resident Evil 4 came out on the GameCube, I skipped it. It wasn't until years later that I sat down to play it on an original GameCube disc that I really dug the new style that Capcom was going for. I know some longtime RE fans were disappointed that it was straying from its George Romero zombified roots, but as a horror game, it's still a chilling experience. It's just a different kind of horror. It deals more with crazy villagers and mutant experiments than with zombies, although it manages to continue the story that was constantly unraveling in earlier games. It has a good balance of action and survival horror, and while I died a lot, it never felt like I was in a situation where I screwed myself over. The game seemed to always give me just enough for what I needed in a given situation. The story was strong, and it was a pretty lengthy installment at over 20 hours. And it's pretty damn disturbing, too. I'll never forget the terror I felt down in the anals of my anus whenever I heard a chainsaw being fired up in the distance, because we all knew it was coming for us the moment we heard that sound. Chainsaw. And I have to say, if you're going to play any version, the game was designed to be played on the GameCube with a GameCube controller. I've tried to play it on the PS4, and it's fine as a port, but it just doesn't do the game justice. I wasn't aware of the Metal Slug series until I came across Metal Slug Anthology on the PS2, but man, if only I had known how good these games were from the start, I would have played every one of them. Fast-paced run-and-gun action mixed with some crazy good pixel art and highly detailed animation makes this series really stand out. While I'm most familiar with the first game, which still holds up, in my opinion, the other Metal Slug game that I play a ton is Metal Slug 6, which came out in 2006 on the Atomic Wave arcade platform. There's not a lot to say about this one. If you're familiar with the series, it gives you everything you'd expect. You start out by blowing up random soldiers to smithereens, and then the game quickly throws aliens and robots your way. The difficulty can get frustrating, especially toward the end, but typically you'll be playing either a port or the arcade version itself, in which you can either add unlimited credits or play in free play mode. Either way, Metal Slug 6 is just a great time. I'd recommend playing with a friend for double the zaniness. It was hard to get excited for Wii games back when the Wii was brand new. The game I bought at launch was The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, and while it was a fine example of a modern-day action-adventure game, I'm going to be honest, I'm not a fan of 3D Zelda games. However, the next year, there was a Wii game that I was actually looking forward to, and you probably saw this one coming. That's right, I'm talking about Super Mario Galaxy. And what a fun experience this was. While the motion controls made Twilight Princess feel kind of gimmicky and awkward, they felt right at home with Mario's latest adventure. The way the game really plays with gravity and space physics added a lot of variety to the game, making Mario somehow feel fresh again. Nintendo is usually really good at doing that. Also, games at that time were known for looking more murky and monochromatic, so seeing a game that was bright and flashy was a breath of frickin' fresh air. It was definitely one of the best looking games on the Wii, as well as one of the best Mario games. If I had to say one negative thing about it, the game pretty much exclusively relies on motion controls, so trying to emulate this game using a traditional controller is not ideal. But thanks to the advancements in emulation, you can actually connect a real Wii remote to your computer using Bluetooth and play it the way it was intended, which certainly helps out. This game is just a whirlpool of fun. I mentioned earlier that I do enjoy racing games. A game that I've dabbled in throughout the years but never really got all that into is 2008's Burnout Paradise. The Burnout series is unique in itself because it actually encourages you to drive unsafely, which, when you think about it, is a very video gamey approach. But with Burnout Paradise, you can literally drive freely around a big city and basically do whatever you want. Like I said, I never really devoted a ton of time to it, but it's an easy one to slip back into from time to time. Yeah, 2008 must not have been that great of a year for video games, at least. In the mid-90s, I played a ton of this game called Tomb Raider. Tomb Raider, as innovative as it was one of those games I had a ton of experience with, but I could never get that far because my tiny teenage brain couldn't solve a lot of the puzzles that the game threw at me. And because of that, I missed out on later games like Naughty Dog's Uncharted series. The first Uncharted game I played was the fourth one, but I liked that one so dang much that the day I finished it, I went up to my local disc replay and bought the Nathan Drake collection on PS4. 2009 saw the release of Uncharted 2: Among Thieves. I know a lot of people consider this the best of the Uncharted games. For me, after playing a relatively simple first game, I thought Uncharted 2 suffered from the same thing a lot of big Hollywood sequels suffer from. It was bigger, it had more explosions, and way more action scenes, but the story was kind of bloated and long in the tooth. And it severely limited the appearance of my favorite character, Sully, who I deeply missed after spending so much time with him in the first game. But if there's anything Uncharted 2 did right, it introduced us to the sexy double agent Chloe. God, I love Chloe. Not as much as Elena, but hey, girl's got some spunk. The villain of the game is also really crazy, coming off more like a James Bond villain, but that's not to say that the game isn't fun. It has a charm and a sense of humor all its own, and honestly, it has some of the most memorable sequences ever in a video game. Just the opening sequence alone is enough to keep you playing. It's a fun sequel, just a bit overblown in my opinion. It took me a while to get to the Mass Effect series. About 10 years ago, I bought the Mass Effect trilogy for PS3. I popped in the first game, and for some reason, I just couldn't get into it. Now, this was before BioWare released the Legendary Edition, which I guess fixed a lot of the issues that plagued the original game, along with various other quality of life enhancements. Earlier this year, I finished playing all 3 games, and now, finally, I get what all the hype was about. These are simply great sci-fi adventure games. 2010 saw the release of Mass Effect 2, which many consider one of the greatest games of all time. I don't know if I'd go that far, but it was definitely a great game. If anything, I remember more from that one than the other 2. The amount of characters you're able to recruit, not to mention just how many game-altering decisions there are to make, is impressive. Every character has their quirks, their own unique backstories that you can help them out with if you choose to, and the story, while hard to follow at times, is always moving forward. I typically don't like games with a lot of world building, but this was a world that I actually had some investment in. I'm glad I finally got to experience it. In 2011, we saw another Uncharted game release on the PS3, Uncharted 3: Drake's Deception. This is hands down my favorite of the original trilogy. It has some of the best action sequences, it fully utilizes Sully, and it even brings back Chloe for a mission or two. But one of its best narrative decisions is how it handles the relationship between Nate and his on-again, off-again girlfriend, wife? I'm not really sure, Elena Fisher. It's a really well-put-together action-adventure game with some inventive puzzles and a thrilling plot. It would have been a great one to go out on, but they just had to go and mess that up, didn't they? So in the spirit of switching back and forth between franchises, 2012 saw the release of Mass Effect 3, which I just finished this year. After picking Mass Effect 2, I don't have much to say about this one, aside from the fact that the graphics and the gameplay are top-notch. We see the return of a few classic characters from the original game, as well as an epic climax to various plot threads that began with the first Mass Effect. What I will say is that when it hits hard. It has one of the most heart-wrenching, gut-punching openings to any video game I've seen, and it also has some of the funnier moments in the series, which I appreciate. I'm not going to lie, as the third part of a trilogy, the ending is a bit hit or miss. Honestly, most of the ending is a miss, considering all the build-up, but the journey to get there is more than worth it. 2013 was basically the year that I was getting interested in gaming again. If you've noticed, a lot of these games I first experienced many years after they were originally released. There were 2 big games in 2013, and both represented swan songs for the PS3. I was so tempted to pick Grand Theft Auto 5 because it really demonstrated how far narrative storytelling had come in video games. Not only did the game have hilarious yet well-thought-out cutscenes that moved the story forward, but characters would have long-winded conversations during gameplay.
Vehicle 29, come in. This is dispatch. We got an abandoned car at San Andreas Avenue.
Yo, we on that like ugly on your mama.
I had never seen that before. GTA 5 also wasn't the first game in the series I played. I actually knew of the series before GTA 3 was a thing, playing the original game on the PC in the late 90s. But since then, I skipped out on GTA because I just didn't see the appeal. Anytime I saw someone play GTA, it was just so they could mess about in the sandbox of Liberty City or San Andreas. But GTA 5 was the first installment where I actually got roped in by the story and its demonic yet somehow likable characters. So consider GTA 5 a very close runner-up. No, the game that really knocked my socks off was another Naughty Dog game, The Last of Us. Now, it's been argued that maybe Neil Druckmann would be better suited to making movies, as his philosophy has always been story first and gameplay second. Even the Uncharted games, with all the action and puzzle solving, I almost enjoy just hanging out with the characters more than I enjoy actually playing the game. It's one of those situations where I'd have just as much fun watching someone play as I do playing myself. And The Last of Us offers that experience in droves. When people talk about The Last of Us, more often than not, they talk about the story and the characters. The relationship that develops between Joel and Ellie is one of the most powerful storytelling tools in all of gaming history. The game is masterfully crafted and thoughtfully written, and all of the actors, especially Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson, deliver A-list performances that truly elevate the material. There's a reason people were going nuts for the HBO adaptation, which is a pretty good interpretation, but it still isn't the game. I've played through The Last of Us multiple times, which is not something I can say for its sequel. There's something here Naughty Dog tapped into that they'll most likely not be able to recreate anytime soon, which is why they keep double and triple dipping with this one. I remember when South Park debuted in 1997, and while I thought it was funny and irreverent, I checked out pretty much right after the movie was released. I have to admit I'm not the show's biggest fan, but I have to say, when it lands, it really lands. There have been multiple South Park games over the years, but before 2014, most, if not all of them, were, shall we say, quality challenged? They weren't good, and that's being kind. And given my thoughts on most turn-based RPGs, you wouldn't think I'd gravitate toward a game like South Park: The Stick of Truth. But I really enjoyed this game. It's been said before, but despite its old-school RPG mechanics, playing this feels like you're playing through an entire season of the show. It features all of the memorable characters, and the writing and animation are spot on. I laughed several times while playing this one, and laughter and fun make a great combination. I didn't own a Wii U until well after its demise, but my friend got a Wii U for Christmas one year. The one game he had for it was Super Mario Maker, released in 2015. What can I say about this? This is a game that could truly keep you busy for months on end. If you were creative enough, you could basically create an entire full-length Mario game with all the tools it provides. Remember those old design-your-own-level modes that would come bundled with games like Excitebike? Well, they don't have nothing on Mario Maker. The interface alone is so intuitive and fun. It's one of the few games that actually justifies the existence of the Wii U tablet. I played some amazing fan-created levels on this thing, but even if you know diddly squat about level design, you could just create some BS course devoid of all logic and just laugh at watching your friends try to play through your chaotic battlefield. And if you run out of ideas, you could always go online and see what levels the community came up with. The possibilities were truly endless. This is one of Nintendo's rare gifts to the world, and there hasn't been anything like it since, excluding Super Mario Maker 2 for the Switch, obviously. In 2016, I finally caved and bought a PlayStation 4. I bought it for two specific games. One was the recently announced Final Fantasy VII Remake, which, as it turns out, was another 4 years away. The other game was just around the corner, Doom 2016. Whenever a new Doom came out, you usually needed a really high-end PC to run it, as was the case with all the past PC Doom games. Fortunately, as the PS4 was both cheaper and more than capable of running it, I went with that. When I picked up my PS4 from Best Buy, there were two versions to choose from, the Call of Duty bundle and the Uncharted 4 bundle, which came in a nice blue color and had the Uncharted logo painted on it. Snazzy. So, given how little interest I had in Call of Duty, I went with Uncharted 4: A Thief's End, which I figured I would try out once I finished blazing through Doom. As it turns out, while I enjoyed Doom, it was a much more difficult game than I anticipated. It actually got to be a bit frustrating at some parts. I played Uncharted 4 as a kind of therapy session from rage-quitting Doom, and I was simply blown away. At the time, Uncharted 4 was the PS4's killer app, and truth be told, it was the first Uncharted game I ever played. But what really impressed me, the thing I remember about the game to this day, was how mature the storytelling was. I don't mean it went the way of The Last of Us, but I could tell, without even ever having played the earlier games, that Nate and his wife Elena had been through the ringer. They felt like an honest-to-God married couple, and watching them bicker and laugh together, it seems like a small thing, but it really pulled at my heartstrings. Their relationship seemed so genuine, and this comes back into play later in the game, where their marriage is really put to the test. The gameplay in the Uncharted series has never been top shelf. That's pretty much the trend with most of Naughty Dog's games, but there were so many unexpected action sequences that really elevated this game to platinum status. This wasn't only my favorite game of 2016, it might possibly be on my personal list of top 10 favorite games of all time.
Know what I love about partying with a bunch of crooks?
What's that?
Nobody cares if you smoke indoors.
I like most Mario games. Most. You couldn't pay me to get through Super Mario Sunshine, but most of his other games range from pretty good to really frickin' incredible. My first taste of Super Mario Odyssey, released for the Switch in 2017, put it somewhere in the middle. I was really unsure of it. On the one hand, I loved the openness of it. In 2017, I was still getting used to the sandbox style of games. It seemed like everyone was jumping on that bandwagon, much how like most 2D games in the late 90s had to transition to 3D at some point. Mario controlled great, and the added gimmick of using Cappy to take control of basically any enemy in the game made it really enjoyable to experiment. The T-Rex seemed out of place in a Mario game, given how realistic the textures were on him, but I have to admit, the first time you take control of old Rex here, oh man, there's nothing like it. But honestly, this turned out to be one of the most well-designed Mario games in the entire series. Every new world feels like a completely different experience, which, if executed poorly, could be a detriment, but here, it all gels together perfectly. It goes without saying, with over 900 moons to collect, which I did accomplish by the way, there's more than enough here to keep you busy for months on end. The later levels are very challenging, especially if you're going for 100% completion, but I'll be honest, rarely did I feel overwhelmed or frustrated when I hit those difficulty spikes. It's just a very well-polished, well-put-together Mario game. There's a reason why people praise it as much as they do, because it frickin' earns it. 2018 seemed to be a pretty big year for games, but for whatever reason, I must have skipped out on most of them. Now, to be fair, I was never big on the Street Fighter franchise. I popped a few quarters into Street Fighter 2 as a kid, but I think you already know I was much more of a Mortal Kombat freak. I did play the Street Fighter Alpha games on the OG PlayStation, however, and while I admittedly suck at it, I do enjoy the occasional bout of Street Fighter 3. Any version, really. The newer Street Fighter games are always good for a quick stress reliever, but in 2018, there was a compilation of classic arcade goodness that even I couldn't pass up. I'm talking about Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Collection. I think this was my first time trying out the original Street Fighter, and man, it sucked. Or rather, I really sucked at it. Pulling off even the simplest special moves is almost impossible, but when one lands, man, you've pretty much won that round. But it's all in all just a fantastic package containing 12 awesome games, including multiple versions of Street Fighter 2, all the alphas, and all 3 versions of Street Fighter 3, which I still suck at, but damn if they're not a blast to play. I'll admit, even when I picked this one up, it was good for a weekend, but popping it back in today, it's just as fun as it ever was, and a damn fine collection of games. When The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening came out for the Game Boy in 1993, it was impressive. The idea that a full-length Zelda adventure could fit on such a small cartridge? Again, I watched my uncle play a ton of it, but it was one that I initially skipped over. From what I heard, the whole concept was that the whole adventure was just a dream, so it didn't really appeal to me. Also, at that time, I still just wasn't any good at Zelda games in general. I didn't actually play this one until years later, and truth be told, it actually turned out to be one of my favorite games in the series. It still held up. But then I got my hands on the Switch version, and holy crap, it actually gives A Link to the Past a run for its money. Don't get me wrong, it's basically the exact same game as the Game Boy version, just with a cute little toy-inspired art style and far better controls. It's so much easier using items when you have 4 face buttons as opposed to the Game Boy's 2 face buttons. Aside from that, the game has some incredible level designs and really fun bosses. It's got a unique charm that is hard to match. I know the art style is contentious with some fans, but keep in mind, people didn't really like the cel-shaded art style of Wind Waker when that game first came out, and I think people have come around. And one of the most memorable aspects of the Link's Awakening remake is Dampé's dungeon building minigame. You collect these little chamber stones throughout the game, and when you trade them into Dampé, you'll have access to a little mini-game where you piece together your own dungeon using rooms you've already encountered. At first I was a little overwhelmed by this mini-game and didn't pay it any mind, but man, once I figured out what I was doing, I couldn't get enough. It's currently the closest thing we have to a Zelda Maker, and really gives you a good idea of what a Mario Maker type Zelda game could be. This is one of the few Switch games I'd highly recommend. 2020. We all know what was happening that year, but 2020 also brought us some amazing video games. It was really hard to pick just one. Remember, 2020 was the year of Doom Eternal and Final Fantasy VII Remake. And while Remake became one of my favorite games of all time, I think I have to give this pick to Cyberpunk 2077, just because of how many hours I've actually put into this one. I know all about its infamous release. In 2020, I had an older gaming laptop that just wasn't powerful enough to run the game. And after hearing about the poor console ports, my only other option at that time was to stream it on Stadia. Remember Stadia? And even though it was a fine experience, my first run through the game was done entirely through Stadia, I decided to bite the bullet and purchase a new gaming laptop. And even though it turned my laptop into an omelet maker, the game was so much more enjoyable. I spent hundreds of hours exploring every life path, doing every side quest, finding every NCPD hustle, and buying up every card the game would throw at me. I've even played through the Phantom Liberty DLC twice, and both times I got a completely different ending. It's a world that I still enjoy popping into once in a while. I can't explain it. Everything about it is just straight up fun. While I enjoyed crapping my pants as I scored the dark halls of Resident Evil 7, it gave me a little bit of PTSD as it tended to lean more toward the survival horror roots of the original Capcom games. What I loved about 2021's Resident Evil Village was that it was a return to the more actiony gameplay of RE4, and somehow it still managed to be unsettling and fun. It brings back the mysterious merchant, gives you some great weapon upgrades, and once again it has a pretty intimidating early game antagonist who is always looking to scare the bejesus out of you. It's one of the more memorable RE games in recent years, and despite my spotty history with the franchise, it made me really curious to see what Capcom has in store for the future of the series. Say what you want about the current state of Disney Star Wars. The fact that you can play through all 9 films as a huge cast of recognizable characters is amazing. I played this a ton when it came out in 2022. This is LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga. I was well aware of the earlier LEGO Star Wars games, and I gave a few of them a try, but apart from the novelty, I never gave any of them a fair shake. But given that this was all 9 movies in one package, and it was more open world than those earlier games, I gave it a try. Man, this is an experience. You really feel like a kid again, playing through your favorite Star Wars scenes with your toy Legos. And I mean, every scene is recreated. This is a huge game. I mean, again, say what you will about the later films, but being able to run around on planets from The Last Jedi, even though I don't like that movie, is still really inspiring and, need I say, fun. If you're a Star Wars fan, no matter what age you are, trust me, you're doing yourself a disservice if you miss out on this one. I've heard that a lot of the more recent Star Wars games have their issues, but this one more than makes up for it. 2023 brought us a somewhat controversial title in the form of The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. Now, the game itself wasn't that controversial. If I had one major issue with the game, it's that it's just too much of the same. It's obvious that Nintendo simply reused all of Breath of the Wild's assets and simply added to the landscape with new sky islands and underground segments, as well as a selection of new abilities. But other than that, it's basically a glorified expansion pack. Technically, I think it is a much bigger game, with more variety in its dungeons and its shrines, but visually, it looks like the exact same game. But it's still really fun, and I poured hours into it. The reason I say this game was controversial is because, well, a lot of people were playing this game using emulation, which actually got one emulator in particular in hot water with Nintendo. Ah, the world we live in. And finally, the best game of 2024. There's just no competition with this one. I don't think I've sank as many hours into a game as I have with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I simply love these games, and I know, technically it's still not a finished game. But technically, the Mass Effect games all come together to tell a massive story, and everyone praised those games, so why should the remake series be any different? Because it's based on an existing game? Oh, maybe that's why. I simply love Square's attention to detail with these games. True story. While I love the original FF7, I don't always enjoy playing it. I'm just not good at turn-based RPGs, and sometimes the combat can feel repetitive. I always wished it played more like an overhead Zelda game, where you could actually see your enemies and actively engage them in combat, rather than have all these random encounters when all I want to do is find a way to get out of the Mithril Mines. The remake games gave me everything I ever wanted from these games, including quick and fun combat, memorable boss battles, and most importantly, characters I really care about. And granted, I love the characters in FF7, that's what really makes that game stand out to me. But with all the great dialogue most of the time, the fantastic performances and all the little extra things that Remake and Rebirth added in, these are truly great games. While I think Remake holds up better in its narrative, Rebirth takes what I already consider to be a near-perfect game and improves on just about every aspect. The combat feels even smoother with so many options in combat it'll make your head spin. The first time I realized just how many movesets my party members had access to, I didn't know where to begin. The materia system was given a huge overhaul with so many more materia combinations to mess around with, and most of the changes made to the narrative were pleasantly surprising. I'm not crazy about the Zack segments, which you can thankfully skip during your second playthrough, and sometimes the narrative gets interrupted with a plethora of side missions. This game has so much freaking content, but most of that content is worth your time. I'm not a fan of card games, not even Triple Triad, which most FF fans seem to enjoy, but I have to say, throwing down in a game of Queen's Blood is pretty satisfying, especially since you never have anything to lose if you suck at it. Now, I recently played through the PC version of the game, 100%ing it, and by 100%ing, I mean not only did I get all of the Steam achievements, but I also checked off the entire post-game checklist, even playing through all the Skywheel date options at the Gold Saucer. But get this wasn't the first time I platinumed the game. I also platinumed the game last year on the PS5. That run took me around 290 hours. This time it took me just under 200 hours because I was more familiar with how the game worked. But that's nearly 500 hours I poured into a single player game. And keep in mind, to fully experience this game, you need to run through it twice, the second time being on a pretty unforgiving hard mode. So I've run through this thing 4 times. You might be saying to yourself, gee, that wasn't an incredible waste of time. But you know what? Maybe you're right. I felt that at times, but I wouldn't have done it if I wasn't having such a damn good time playing it. So there you have it. Phew. I didn't think I was ever going to finish this list, but man, what a ride. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. I don't want to shoot myself in the foot, but given how long it took to produce this one, chances are good that it probably won't get a ton of views. But that being said, if you liked the video, you can hit the subscribe button. Then click that like button if you really want to. It couldn't hurt. Then tell your friends about me, because sharing is caring and all that crap. I hope you enjoyed my video, and I hope to see what you guys think in the comments. Peace! I really have to find a better closing line.